woolly bugger fly is a great fly for beginner fly tyers, but you do still have to have some specialized tools and materials in order to tie this fly. So let's go over what I have here. I have a long rooster saddle hackle feather here that we'll use on the body of the fly. I have a marabou feather that has a lot of movement we'll use for the tail. This chenille is going to make up the bulk of the body of the fly, but we'll add a flash of tinsel to attract some fish as well. This black thread is going to be used to hold this fly together. We're going to be putting all of these materials on this hook with a long shank. This is a size 6, but you could also go a little bigger or smaller for this fly. We're going to be weighting down the fly with this tungsten bead right here. And that's going to make sure our fly sinks down a little bit lower in the water. You could also use some wire instead of the tinsel to help weight down your fly. We have some necessary tools for tying this fly. One of them is this bobbin, which is going to hold our thread as we work. And then a good pair of sharp scissors. These are specialty fly tying scissors, but a good pair of sewing scissors will work just fine. You will also want a type of glue or something to put on the knot of your fly as you finish to make sure it lasts a long time and doesn't come unraveled in the water. You can buy specialty fly tying glue and varnish. I tend to just use a nail hardener or a clear nail polish. Sometimes will even work as well. Then we have some specialty tools that kind of just help the process go a little easier, but they aren't necessary for tying the fly. One of them is a bobbin threader. This can be really helpful when you're trying to get that thin thread through this long bobbin right here. Another one is hackle pliers, which help you hold on to the feathers so they don't slip out of your hand while you're winding them around your hook. And finally, we have a whip finish tool, and this just helps make a really strong knot for your fly. So these are some optional tools, but this is a good starter for our woolly bugger fly. As we start our tying video, you can see that the hook is held in place by another very important piece of equipment called a vise that clamps it in place, and there we're using the bobbin threader to pull that thread through the bobbin. We're going to do a series of wraps on the hook with the thread, and that's going to build up the body of the fly and also add some weight to the fly so that it sinks a little bit lower in the water. We're going to tie in that marabou tail. We're going to tie it in all the way up the body so that it adds a little bit of bulk to the body and then leaves the little bit of tail out for that nice movement in the water. Here we're adding the tinsel, but this time we're going to actually use just some craft tinsel that we found at the craft store. You don't need to go to a specialty store for a lot of these materials. You can find them right in your local craft store. And after we tie that in tight, we're going to be adding in that hackle feather. But before we tie it in, we're going to tear off the fuzzy parts of the feather because we really just want the parts of the feather that really look like bug legs, those thinner parts of the feather. So we're going to tie that all the way up the shank of the hook, nice and tight, and then we're going to add our chenille here. And so our chenille, again, we're going to use to build up the body of the fly. So we'll tie it in and then we'll wrap it all the way up and lock it in place with a few wraps of thread. Now we have a lot of materials on here, and it would be horrible if all of a sudden our thread broke and the whole thing unraveled. So what I'm going to do right now before I go any further is just add a couple of knots. And to do that, what I'll do is I'll lay 2 fingers on top of the thread, turn it to make a little triangle, go over the eye of our hook and the bead, and pull it down to make sure it's all secure. Now we're going to wrap up that hackle all the way up the body. You can see how those feathers stick straight out and look a little bit like legs. And here we're going to use those hackle pliers to add a little weight and hold on to the end of that feather so we can do a series of knots to lock it in place so it doesn't unravel and unwind. And then we can always trim off that excess feather up there in the front. And now we're going to use that piece of tinsel to wrap up through that hackle to lock it in place, and again add a little flash to attract a fish. And we'll wrap that in nice and tight, and we'll do a couple of wraps right behind the head of that bead on the fly, and that's going to make it look like the thorax of the fly there. And finally, we'll do a series of overhand knots to lock this fly in place. Now again, you could use that wet finish tool, but a series of knots will do if you don't have that. We will also add a little bit of fly cement, or again, you can use that nail hardener to lock that thread in place. And finally, we're going to use a tool to kind of pull out some of those hackle fibers to make it look a little bit more buggy. Then we'll let it dry, cut our thread, and we'll be good to go.